The curious sound at dusk, the small town was quiet as the sun began to set. Golden light fell across the empty fields, old fences, and narrow roads. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets didn't last long, but there was one secret that no one wanted to talk about. An old house stood at the edge of town, hidden behind tall grass and broken trees. People said it had been empty for years, but no one ever dared to go too close. A teenage boy had just moved into town with his mother. They were starting over, looking for peace after a hard time. He didn't know anyone yet, so he spent most of his time walking around. Sometimes he'd take long walks to clear his head, especially near the woods. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, he passed by the old house. He had seen it before, but never this close. The gate was hanging off its hinges. The paint on the walls had peeled away. The windows were covered in dirt, and the roof had started to fall apart. It looked forgotten, like time had stopped for it. But as he walked past the house, something made him stop. There was a sound. Soft and strange, he stood still, listening. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he heard it again. It was a piano, playing slowly, like a song from a dream. The notes were clear and beautiful, but also sad. It didn't make sense. No one lived there. There was no light inside. The sound gave him chills, but it also pulled him closer. He walked up to the fence and looked through the cracks. The front door was shut, and the windows were too dusty to see through. But the music kept playing, rising and falling like someone was pouring their heart into each note. He felt frozen in place, listening. Then, as quickly as it started, the music stopped. Silence fell over the house, and the wind blew through the trees again. The boy looked around, half expecting someone to jump out. But there was no one, just the quiet and the strange feeling in his chest. He turned around and walked away. But every few steps he stopped to look back. He couldn't shake the sound of the piano from his mind. It stayed with him, even after he returned home that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mother had made dinner, but he barely touched it. She asked if something was wrong. But he just said he was tired. He didn't want to tell her about the house. He wasn't sure what to say. Who would believe that an empty house was playing music? The next day he went to the small town library. I found an old woman who worked there and asked her if she knew anything about the house. Her face changed as soon as he mentioned it. She lowered her voice and said, "That place? People stay away from it." He asked why, but she just shook her head. Things happened there a long time ago. Things best left alone. He didn't press further. But now he was even more curious. The house wasn't just old. It had a story. He wanted to know what it was. Why did it sound like someone was still there? Why did the music feel like it was calling to him? The rest of the week, he kept thinking about the piano. He passed by the house a few more times, hoping to hear the sound again, but it never came back. Still, every time he looked at the windows, he felt like someone or something was looking back. He didn't feel scared. Not exactly. More like something deep inside him was waking up. Like a memory that wasn't his. The town stayed quiet, as always. People went on with their lives, never mentioning the house, but for him, everything had changed since that evening. He didn't know it yet. But that soft piano sound would lead him into a story that had been waiting to be told, and it all began with one strange melody at dusk. The house no one dares enter the next morning felt different. The sun was shining, but the memory of that haunting piano still echoed in the boy's mind. He couldn't let it go. It wasn't just a sound, it was a question, and he needed an answer instead of going home after school. He took a long walk again, this time not by accident, but on purpose. He found himself standing in front of the old house once more. From this distance, it looked harmless, just broken wood, overgrown weeds, and a few shattered windows. But something about it whispered that it was more than just an empty building. As he stared at the house, a voice broke his focus. "You're not thinking about going in there, are you?" It was an old man sitting on a bench near the roadside. The boy hesitated, then walked over. The man's eyes were sharp, even behind his thick glasses. "I heard something," the boy finally said. "A piano." The old man's face froze. He looked at the house, then slowly shook his head. "You're not the first one to hear it," he said softly, "but it always ends the same trouble." The boy asked what happened there, but the man didn't give a straight answer. He only said there used to be music, real music, back when she was alive. "Who?" the boy asked, but the man simply stood up, gave a tired sigh, and walked away. It left him with more questions than answers. Later that day, he went to the diner where locals gathered. He sat at the counter, sipping a drink, listening, watching. When two older women started talking about that house, he leaned in closer. "I heard her playing again." One of them said in a whisper, "Just last week." The other woman shook her head. "That poor girl, still trapped in there." I bet they looked around nervously, then changed the subject. The boy's heart beat faster. Who was she? He couldn't sleep that night. His room felt colder. Every creak in the floor sounded like piano notes. The idea of a ghost didn't scare him. What scared him was the feeling that someone in that house was waiting for someone to finally listen. The next day, he skipped school and walked straight to the edge of town. He took a different path, one the locals never used, through the trees around the tall grass. And behind the house, where the shadows were thicker, there he saw something strange. A path, nearly hidden, led to a small side door. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But when he pressed on it, it opened with a soft groan. The inside was dark and cold. He stepped in slowly, every step echoing in the stillness. Dust floated in the air like frozen time. And then there it was again, the soft sound of a single piano note, just one, but it was enough to make his heart stop. He followed the sound, turning a corner, his breath held tight. But the hallway was empty. The silence returned. Heavier than before, he backed out slowly, his hands shaking not from fear, but from something deeper. Like he had just brushed against a memory that wasn't his, he didn't go home right away. Instead, he sat under a tree behind the house, thinking this place wasn't just old. It was filled with something that refused to be forgotten, and for some reason, it had chosen him. He didn't know what he was looking for. A ghost, a story, a reason, but he knew one thing: this house had music trapped inside it. And maybe, just maybe, he was the one meant to set it free. First steps inside the rain didn't fall hard that day. It came gently, like a soft whisper against the rooftops. Most people stayed indoors, sipping coffee or reading old books, but the boy didn't. He walked, hood over his head, water soaking. Through his sleeves, his feet led him to the same place, again back to the abandoned house. This time, he wasn't just curious, he was drawn, like something inside that house had called him by name. He didn't stop to think, didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He stepped past the gate, through the tall, wet grass, and toward the side door he had found before. The old wood creaked as he pushed it open. The air inside was colder than outside, not just from the rain, but like time had forgotten this place. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, as if the house was holding its breath. He looked around slowly, walls covered in peeling wallpaper, broken picture frames, a chandelier hanging crooked from the ceiling. But the strangest thing was the silence. It wasn't normal. Silence. It was thick, full, like it was waiting. He stepped forward again, then stopped. There, in the corner of the grand hallway, stood the piano. It wasn't covered in dust like everything else. It looked clean, untouched, like someone had just polished it. The keys shone faintly in the dim light. He walked closer, heart thudding in his chest, not out of fear, but from something else, something he couldn't explain. He reached out and gently pressed one key. It made a soft, perfect note, not broken, not out of tune. Alive. He pressed another key, then another. Each sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls like memories. Suddenly, a low note played by itself. He jumped back, eyes wide, hands shaking. No one else was there. But the note had been played. He was sure of it. The room grew colder. Then slowly, the piano began to play. No hands, no person, just music. A soft, beautiful melody filled the space. It wasn't random. It was a song, full of sadness and longing. Each note felt like a tear. Falling one by one, he stood there, frozen, listening. It was the same melody he had heard that first evening, but now it was clearer. He felt it moving through him. Images came into his mind, flashes of someone sitting at the piano, someone crying, someone hoping. It was like the piano wasn't just playing music, it was telling a story. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence returned. Heavier than before, the boy stepped back, unsure what to do. His eyes scanned the room again, and that's when he saw it, a small crack in the piano bench just under the lid. He knelt down and pulled gently. The wood creaked open, revealing something hidden inside. A notebook, old and faded, tied with a blue ribbon. He held it carefully. The pages nearly falling apart. There was a name on the front, written in delicate handwriting. A girl's name, but not one he recognized. His fingers shook as he untied. The ribbon inside were pages filled with music notes, scribbled thoughts, and short journal entries. Each word felt like a whisper from the past. I can't stop the fire, but I hope my music survives. One page read, I miss him, but they said we couldn't be together, another said. He closed the book gently and looked at the piano again. It didn't move this time, didn't make a sound, but he didn't need it to. He had heard enough, felt enough. This house wasn't haunted the way people thought. It wasn't cursed. It was holding on to a story that no one had cared to hear. And now that story had found someone willing to listen. He took the notebook, stood up, and walked toward the door. As he reached the exit, he turned around one last time. The piano stood silent, still but somehow grateful. He stepped out into the rain, not afraid anymore. He had crossed a line that most people never dared to approach, and deep down he knew he wasn't done yet. The music had only just begun. The melody that tells a story. That night, sleep never came. The boy sat on the edge of his bed, holding the fragile notebook in both hands. Rain tapped softly against the window, but his thoughts were louder. He turned the pages slowly, each one filled with music, words, pain, and something else, hope. It was like reading someone's heart spilled out in ink. The girl who wrote it, she had a voice, a story, and most of all, a song. But no one had ever heard her. Somehow, that silence had found its way to him, and he couldn't turn away from it. The next afternoon, when the town was quiet again, he returned to the house, not with fear, not even with hesitation this time, with purpose. He walked through the same creaking door, stepped over the same cracked tiles, and once again, there was the piano waiting. He sat down carefully. The bench creaked beneath him, opened the notebook and placed it beside the keys. Then he lifted his hands and began to play. At first his fingers trembled, missing notes, unsure. But the melody was already inside him, it only needed to be unlocked. As he played, the house changed. The air felt warmer, the silence softer. It was as if the walls were listening too. Each note carried a piece of her story, her love for music, her secrets, her sadness. He saw her in his mind, not clearly, but like a faded photograph, a young girl with a gentle smile and tired eyes, sitting where he sat now, pouring her soul into every key. And then something strange happened. His hand stopped, but the piano didn't. It continued playing, the notes flowing gently. He looked down. His fingers weren't moving, but the song carried on, like invisible hands had taken over. His heart pounded, but he didn't run. The music wasn't threatening. It was beautiful. Full of emotion, tears welled in his eyes without warning, not because he was scared, but because the song made him feel everything: loss, hope, love, feelings that weren't his, but somehow belonged to him now. Then the music faded, one note at a time, until silence returned. But this silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful, like the piano had finished saying what it needed to say. He looked around the room again, and this time noticed small things he had missed before. A photograph on the far wall, almost hidden behind a curtain of dust. He walked over, wiped the frame. And there she was, the girl from the notebook, sitting at the piano, her eyes full of life. Behind her stood a young man, smiling down at her. They looked happy, like nothing in the world could break them, but something had, and the house had kept it locked away until now. He took the photo down gently and placed it beside the notebook. Now her face had a name. Her music had a listener. She wasn't just a ghost or a forgotten melody. She was real. He stayed for hours, playing, listening, feeling, and every time he played, he understood her a little more. It was like solving a puzzle made from music and memory, but he still didn't know the full story. Why had she stopped playing? What had happened to the boy in the picture? Why did the house fall into silence for so long? He knew one thing: this wasn't just a song. It was a message, broken into pieces, waiting to be put back together, and he was the one meant to finish it. As he stepped out of the house that evening, the sky was clear. No rain, no clouds, just the soft glow of the setting sun. He held the notebook close. And for the first time since he moved to this quiet town, he felt like he had a reason to be here. Something had chosen him not by chance, but by need. And the story inside the piano wasn't finished. Not yet. The diary in the bench the next morning, he woke up with a different kind of energy. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like duty. Like he was carrying something that didn't belong to him, but needed him anyway. The notebook sat beside his bed, the cover still slightly open, as if it had been breathing through the night. He grabbed it gently and left before sunrise. The streets were empty, the sky still soft and gray. No one saw him slip past the trees and through the broken gate. By now, he didn't knock or hesitate. He belonged to this place, and somehow it belonged to him too, inside the house. The silence greeted him like an old friend. The air was cool but not cold, and the dust seemed to settle whenever he was near. The piano stood just as he'd left it. Quiet, waiting, he sat on the bench again. This time not to play but to dig deeper. He remembered the small gap in the bench, the spot where he had found the notebook before, but today he noticed something. Knew a narrow crack just under the cushion. Almost invisible unless you were really looking. He reached in slowly and his fingers touched something hard. Another object, flat and thin, wrapped in old velvet. He pulled it out carefully, and when he unwrapped it, his breath caught. A second notebook, smaller, older, and heavier, with something else. This wasn't filled with music. It was a diary. The handwriting was different, sharper, tighter, like the person writing had been nervous or in pain. He turned to the first page. There was no name. Just a date. Old, very old, but what it said made his skin tingle. They told me to stop seeing him, but I couldn't. His music was the only place I felt free. I wouldn't understand our families, the town, the rules, so we met here, in secret, every day. Page after page told the story of two young souls, one, a gifted pianist, the other a boy who wasn't good enough in the eyes of others. They were from different worlds, divided by family, tradition, and quiet judgment. But inside these walls, they built something of their own, a world of sound and silence. Until the day everything changed. One entry read, "The fire wasn't an accident. They wanted to silence our story, erase what we had. He tried to save the piano, but they stopped him. I never saw him again." The boy reading these words sat frozen. The air suddenly heavier. It wasn't just a love story yet. It was a buried truth. Someone had tried to destroy more than a house. They had tried to destroy a voice, a song, a memory, and somehow the piano had survived. Not just the flames, but time itself. It had held on to her story. Waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to hear it, he placed the diary next to the music notebook. Two voices once separated, now side by side again. He stood up, walked around the piano slowly. Running his hand along its edges, there were burn marks on the back scars that matched the diary's words. He sat down again and played a single note, then another, then a chord, and before he knew it, his fingers were flowing. Not reading the notes, but feeling them, as if the piano itself was guiding him. Each sound seemed to unlock something inside the house. A floorboard creaked upstairs. A light breeze moved the curtains. The house wasn't empty. Not really. It was alive with memories. And he wasn't just discovering the past, he was becoming part of it. When he finished playing, he didn't rush to leave. He sat there, eyes closed, letting the silence settle again. A peaceful silence this time, like the house had exhaled. He looked at the two notebooks in front of him. They were more than just pages. They were pieces of a soul. And now he knew the story was far from over. Some truths weren't just meant to be remembered. They were meant to be told, and his voice's hands might be the only way left to tell them. A tune that connects the past and present. The morning sun filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls. Dust floated in the air. Like golden memories, dancing between light and shadow. The boy sat once again in front of the piano, both notebooks open, one full of her music, the other full of her truth. But this time he wasn't just reading. He was ready to play everything, every unfinished piece, every thought she had turned into melody. It wasn't about playing it perfectly. It was about understanding her voice and letting it speak again. He placed his fingers on the keys, closed his eyes, and started. The sound that came out wasn't just music. It was emotion deep, raw and alive. It was as if the piano had been holding its breath for years, and now finally it could breathe as he played. Something strange began to happen. The floorboards beneath him stopped creaking. The wind outside quieted. Even the air around him seemed to pause. And then a soft warmth passed over his hands. Not heat, not cold. It felt like someone was standing behind him, watching, listening, maybe even smiling. He didn't dare turn around. Instead, he kept playing, letting the music rise, and as the final note echoed across the empty house, he heard something that made him freeze. A second piano note, soft, slow, following his. But his hands were no longer on the keys. He looked up, heart pounding. The piano was playing by itself again, but it wasn't random like before. It was answering him note by note, chord by chord. The piano was finishing the melody he had just begun. It was like a duet across time, across silence. Tears welled in his eyes. He didn't know who or what was with him. But it didn't feel scary. It felt right. Like she was here, finally heard. Finally free to play again. When the music stopped, he whispered into the still air, "I heard you," and for a brief moment, the wind moved through the broken window and carried a faint whisper in return, not in words, but in feeling. He smiled, gently wiped his eyes, and reached for the music notebook again later that day. He brought his small speaker and recording device from home. He set them up in front of the piano and pressed record. He played every piece in the notebook one after another, and as he did, the piano sometimes joined in on its own, softly, beautifully, almost like it remembered how to sing. The recordings were filled with something that couldn't be explained. Not just sound, but presence. Anyone who listened could feel it: warmth, sadness, beauty, truth. It wasn't just a piano anymore. It was her voice, reaching through time. He uploaded the recordings online with no title, no name, just the music, and within days, people began to find it. Comments poured in. "Why does this make me cry? I don't know who wrote this, but it feels like they know me." Even strangers could feel the weight of her story in every note. At school, someone asked him, "Did you write that music?" He shook his head and said, "I just played what was already there." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was part of it now. Part of the message she never got to send. The house wasn't cold anymore. It still creaked, still leaned. A little too far to one side, but it didn't feel forgotten. It felt loved, heard, awake, and the piano it waited for him every day. Not to teach, not to haunt, but to finish the conversation they had started together. The past hadn't just found its voice, it had found someone to carry it forward. And that tune, once lost, now had a place in the present. The night of the final performance, the moon was high that night. Glowing like a quiet promise in the sky, the air was still, but inside the boy's heart, everything was moving. For days he had played alone, with only the piano and her spirit, listening, but now he felt it was time to share her music with the world she left behind. He stood in the town square holding a single handwritten note. It simply said, "Come to the old house at dusk, and bring nothing but your ears." He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. Some laughed when they read it. Some ignored it. But a few, those who remembered the house, the whispers, the long-forgotten stories, they came. By sunset, a small group had gathered in front of the abandoned house. It had never seen this many visitors in years. The boy opened the creaking door, nodded, and let them in. One by one, some were curious, some were nervous, but all were silent, as they stepped into the space. Candles lit the room gently. Placed along the walls and near the piano, the air smelled of old wood, dust, and something softer, maybe memory. The photo of the girl and the boy from the diary sat on a chair nearby. The notebooks were open, pages ready, and in the center of it all stood the piano. Polished, patient, alive, the boy took his place on the bench, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music was soft at first, almost like a whisper, but as it grew, the sound wrapped around the room like a blanket. It wasn't just a melody, it was a message of love, of pain, of being silenced and finally being heard. No one moved. Some closed their eyes. Others stared at the piano, watching, waiting. And then it happened, the piano began to play with him, just like before. Soft notes filled the spaces between his hands. And every person in that room felt it, something beyond the ordinary, something honest. A few people began to cry out of sadness. But from something deeper, it was like they remembered something they had never lived. Like a part of them had been hiding too, waiting for a song to set it free. And as the final note echoed through the room, everything stopped. The boy lifted his hands, and the piano rested in silence. Not the cold silence of an empty place, but the warm silence of something finally complete. A breeze moved through the room, soft as breath. One candle flickered and then went out. But no one flinched. They knew what it meant. She had heard it. And she was at peace when the boy stood. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The room was full of something greater than applause. It was full of gratitude. People left slowly, quietly. Some touched the piano before walking out. Others looked at the photo, eyes wide with memory. No one asked who the boy was. They didn't need to know. They only needed to feel. He stayed behind, alone with the piano. He didn't play again that night. He just sat there, eyes closed, and the house, for the first time in decades, felt whole outside. The wind carried the final note far into the night. Not to be forgotten, but to be remembered, as something true, something pure, a gift from the past to the present. The house breathes again the next morning. The town woke to a strange kind of silence, not the cold kind, but the kind that comes after something sacred has happened. People walked past the old house with new eyes, no longer afraid, no longer turning their heads. Something had changed, and they felt it. Even if they didn't fully understand it, inside the house, the piano sat still. No more ghostly melodies, no more mysterious whispers, just quiet peace, like a story that had finally been told in a voice that had finally been heard. The boy came back, as he always did, but today felt different. He didn't bring the notebooks. He didn't press record. He simply walked in, sat on the bench, and smiled. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to play. He had done what the music asked of him. He had listened. He had felt, and he had shared her truth with the world. The photo on the chair had fallen gently to the floor overnight. He picked it up, wiped the dust from the glass, placed it on the windowsill. Now, sunlight reached her face. Her smile lit by the morning light she probably never got to see again. He walked through the rooms slowly, each one still broken, still cracked, but no longer empty. He saw the house not for what it had become, but for what it had survived. It had held on to a memory for years, refusing to let her be erased. And now, with her story released, it could finally rest. He returned to the piano one last time and pressed a single key. A soft note, gentle and low. No song followed, no ghostly duet, just silence, a peaceful silence. Before leaving, he placed a folded paper on top of the piano. It simply read, "She played because she loved, not because she was allowed." And beneath it, "If you ever hear her music again, listen with your heart." He stepped outside, and the wind brushed gently against his face. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and for the first time since he moved to this quiet town, he felt like he belonged, not because people knew his name, but because he had become part of something timeless, a bridge between what was forgotten and what must be remembered. Years would pass, the house would still stand. People would come and go, some curious, some lost, And sometimes, and just sometimes, on quiet days, a soft note would drift from inside, and those who heard it would stop, smile, and wonder, not out of fear, but out of awe, because they knew the house still breathed, the story still lived, and the piano still remembered.